This episode contains content about mental health and death. We're here.
Hi, friends.
Oh, I've missed y'all
Hello.
so much.
It's been a while.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for joining
It's been
us.
too long.
All right. So here we are, squeezing the juice. Today we have a different type of episode. We have Sadie here with us, who we'll introduce in a minute.
What's up, Sadie?
What up?
Hi, Sadie. But let's just go ahead and get started with our check-in question.
Yeah, I'm like fired up over here. I'm shimmying. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do the lightning round check-in questions, 20 questions. You cannot ask for follow-up. You just answer it one or the other. Kim, you'll go first, and then Sadie, I'll do you next.
Wait, and are you going to answer third?
Sure, we could do that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
you gotta answer.
All right, Kim, you're going to start us off, yeah?
Yes, I'm ready.
Do you have any questions about the rules?
No, I feel like I need a buzzer, but we'll just have to pretend.
I'm going to give you some options, and you just have to give me a one option back.
Okay, I'm ready.
You ready? All right. Pancakes or waffles?
Waffles.
Okay. Canon or Nikon?
Oh, Canon for sure.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Cruiser or double tail?
Cruiser.
Sushi or burrito?
Sushi.
Run
Gotta go
or
sushi.
bike?
Bike.
Free throw or layup?
Free throw.
Music or podcast?
Oh no. I'm gonna sound old here, but I'm gonna say podcast. My younger
Beanie or
self
hat?
would be angry. Go ahead.
Beanie or hat?
Hat.
Peanut butter or jelly?
Peanut butter.
Bean or cheese?
Cheese.
Okay. Miko mustache or Miko beard?
Ugh. Mustache.
You just like
Is
vomited.
it neither?
It's neither, but it's disgusting.
Oh my god, it's zine or magazine?
Magazine.
Defund
Because of the
police or-
color. I'm not allowed to give you explanations.
You cannot explain.
Sorry, skate witches.
All right, defund the police or defund the police?
Defund the police.
Both.
Divest.
All right. Okay,
Divest
okay.
from the police.
All right. For a workout, upper body or lower body?
Upper body.
All right. Breakfast, lunch, or dinner?
Lunch.
10 seconds.
Lunch.
All right. 7 a.m. or 7 p.m.?
7 p.m.
Soccer or basketball?
Basketball.
Ooh. All right. Quarter pipe or curb?
Yeah. Quarter pipe.
And final one, speaking or listening?
Oh, shit.
You're getting worked over this check-in.
Right now, I'm going to say listening.
I like it. And that's time. Are you sweating?
Wow. That was challenging.
Was that good?
The fact that I
Mother
couldn't
sounds
so
explain made
Right?
it stressful because I wanted to defend my answers.
I totally get it. And I get, hey, that's just right now at this very minute. And they can change in 5 minutes or tomorrow. All right.
Okay.
Just
We'll
know
do it
that.
again at the
Yeah.
end. See if
Yeah.
we can-
All right.
Some
Sadie,
of the
you
sounds
ready?
you were making too. I've
I
never
wanna-
done some of those.
I'm curious.
ASMR.
I'm curious if Sadie is going to choose Miko's mustache or Miko's beard. I
Don't
don't know if
even- you
he
can't
gave
think
us
about it.
approval to use his
Oh.
facial hair in this
I apologize ahead of time.
his
Miko.
likeness. Okay, go ahead.
Sadie, you ready?
Maybe you
yeah.
can change it. Can you customize them on the fly for Sadie?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. All right. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Pancakes or waffles?
Pancakes.
Canon or Nikon?
Canon.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Cruiser board or double tail?
Cruiser board.
Sushi or burrito?
Sushi.
Squat or deadlift?
Squat.
Free throw or layup?
I can't do either. Free throw, I guess.
Okay. Music or podcast?
Music.
Beanie or hat?
Hat.
Peanut butter or jelly?
Peanut butter.
Ketchup or ketchup?
Neither. Neither.
Burn.
All right. Miko, mustache or beard?
Both.
Oh! All right. Zine
Ew.
or magazine?
I think magazine.
Defund the police or defund the police?
Both.
All right. Ollie solo or Ollie with friends?
Ollie with friends.
Breakfast, lunch, or
Nice.
dinner?
Dinner.
7 a.m. or 7 p.m.?
7 a.m.
Let's see. Iron Man or Hulk?
Hulk.
Quarter pipe or
Hilarious.
curb?
Curb.
Speaking or listening?
Listening.
Nice. That's time, Sadie.
Dang, that ketchup one really got me.
I know. I was like reading and trying to think, okay, how can I mix these up for Sadie?
Now I want to come up with 20
was
for you,
great.
Ash.
I know.
We could do it.
Next episode.
Yeah, we should. I'm
Oh wait, you should go
obsessed.
through these though.
Who for me?
Yeah,
All right. Can either of you see him?
I can see them.
Do you want to do me?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Are you ready?
I'm so ready.
Oh shit. Okay. Ready? Pancakes or waffles?
Waffles.
Canon or Nikon?
Cannon.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Cruiser or double tail?
Double tail.
Sushi or burrito?
Oh. Burrito.
Squat or deadlift?
Deadlift.
Beanie
Oh,
or
I
hat?
instantly wanted to change it. Sorry, what was it?
Beanie or hat?
No edits.
Hat.
Music or podcast?
Podcast.
Peanut butter or jelly?
Almond butter.
Hey, that's
cheating.
Miko, mustache or beard?
Mike,
Mustache.
mustache or beard.
Workout upper body or lower body?
Lower body.
Sunset or sunrise?
Ooh. Ooh, that was a good
Hard
one. Sunset.
Ooh, speaking or listening?
Listening all day.
Quarter pipe or curb?
Curb.
Defund the police or defund the police?
Defund the police.
That's the right answer.
That was awesome.
I don't know if
That
I
was so
exactly
good.
did 20, but
You crushed it. I appreciate, what's funny is that like, I feel like I knew the order a little bit, but when you mixed it up, I was like, oh.
Thrown off.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
That was
Breakfast,
great.
lunch, or dinner?
Breakfast.
Oh.
It's also cool to like get a little insight on how it landed for y'all. So like Sadie, when I said free throw or layup and you're like, I can't do either. To me, I'm like, me neither. But like, which one? Is it like, which one's more? I almost put hook shot in there. And I was like,
Ooh. I'm very much like a granny, the granny throw.
oh, okay.
Underhand.
Underhand, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Note to self. This is good. We'll have to
I
do
like
this
this
again.
game. Yeah. New
All right.
check-in question. 20
Awesome.
questions.
I feel warmed up. Thank you for trying that on, y'all.
My face hurts from smiling.
Thanks for organizing
Already? Sorry.
That was awesome. All right.
I'm glad you liked.
We're warmed up.
We can
I
do
think
a try
it's-
not to smile challenge next time.
Just
I think
stare
it's-
at each other.
Yeah. Tell
I think it's-
jokes and we can't smile.
I think it's funny that we all chose listening, but we're literally this is a podcast and we're all speaking.
But the power of listening.
That's true.
And like this moment, which we're about to talk about.
Yes. Let's talk about that.
Listening is
But first, let's talk about who Sadie is. And and this episode specifically, like it's a little bit different than our norm.
yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, my name is Kim and that's Ashley, which if you're listening, that isn't going to help. Say hi.
Hi, it's
That's
me.
Ashley.
It me.
And then we have Sadie. So Sadie is our third team member for Squeezing the Juice, behind the scenes guru. So Sadie's been helping us edit and run our Instagram account, and also just like give us feedback on the show and I don't know, like our
We're up
plans
to.
for it. Yes,
Um,
and the reason why Sadie is here with us is because that's the role she has been playing, but also because I actually know Sadie from you were my intern when I was doing Mafia TV full time, and the cool story is that the three of us actually
Yes.
met on the same day, on the same night, actually
time.
at the same time at an event. It was a panel in Berkeley that was put on by workandskateboarding.com and
Collegiate
what
Skate?
was Collegiate Skate Tour, which is now Keegan's focused on the scholarship fund. But it was a panel about literally like working in skateboarding, and I was on it, and then Ashley and Sadie came. They were in the audience, then we did breakout groups after, and they joined my breakout group, so I met you guys on the same night. And then like, you know, we went down different paths, but here we are back together again.
That event was the source for sure.
It was amazing.
And I literally only went because you were on that panel, being the only woman on that panel.
I also only went for Kim.
I was like, we're going to be best friends. I don't know what I'm going to say, but it's going to go. We're going.
I feel special. But yeah, so then obviously me and Ashley ended up like launching the SF Bay chapter of Skate Like a Girl. And then Sadie ended up interning for me, you know, when I was still running Mafia TV, and here we are today. And then obviously like you went on to do other stuff like graduating college. But yeah.
How many years ago was that?
You graduating college?
Oh, less than one. But
when you interned for me, I think that was like
20.
That was like our first year of Skate Like a Girl, wasn't it? Because I remember like you were doing
it was
things
like
with
2016 or 2017. 2017? 2018? I don't know. You would probably have a better.
2016. I think 2016.
Because you were still living in the Bay. You weren't in Oregon.
Yes, that's true. I took a term off. I think it was 2016 then.
But so yeah, it's a fun story, and it's also just the power of like going to stuff and introducing yourself to people and like saying hi.
Yeah, for sure. Wait, can we just say like what one of Sadie's superpowers? Caption Queen. Can I call you that?
Whoa,
that's a good
Caption
one.
Queen. I just came to me, but
Caption Queen.
I've like, if for all those folks that sit on social media trying to figure out what to write in your caption, DM Sadie. But you must pay her.
I'm freelancing now. Slide into my DMs.
And Sadie, if you could just post your Venmo later in this episode.
There you go.
All right.
You can charge per caption.
Per letter.
All proceeds go to Black Lives Matter.
There we go.
But I would say you were actually like, when you started interning for me, I felt like the area that you felt like you were the strongest in is writing. Like you were a writer. Like you told me you liked writing, and obviously you were helping with the blog content, you know, like you did a few like articles and reviews on different stuff. So I like that makes sense because it translates totally to like social media, because social media, you know, when it comes to Instagram, like there is a caption, and it does like it's like harder than one would think, you know, to like come up with the caption and like the voice and all that stuff. So yeah, that's who Sadie is, and we're excited to have you here, Sadie.
Thanks for being here, Sadie.
I'm so excited to be here.
Crushing it. And yeah, today we are going to talk about what's happening in the world, but also use it as an opportunity for both Ashley and I to like share more about our personal experiences. I think it's safe to say that, well, I and all of us have been reflecting a lot, you know, on just sort of our own experiences and our role in this world that we live in. And we just thought it'd be a cool opportunity to have a conversation with, you know, about it with each other, kind of with the goal of like inspiring others to have conversations with each other, friends, peers, whoever, family members. And I think there's just so much power in communication, and there's healing, you know, in communication, but there's also inspiration to like figure out what to do next or where to go next, or maybe how to get through some of like stuckness or spaces or mindsets that, you know, don't really produce anything or move things forward, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the goal of today. I don't know, do you guys want to
Yeah.
throw in anything?
What I wanted to throw in there is just like, you know, kind of recentering like what this is about and why we decided to create Squeezing the Juice. And it really is about letting people be the experts of their own lives and really using the power of story and each other's story to empower one another and empower ourselves. And I think we originally were going to do an episode where me and Kim share our own personal stories and our upbringing and what makes us tick and who we've been and where we're going and all of that. And we really got that at this time, how interwoven our stories are to this larger conversation for racial justice and racial equity. And so we decided to bring those parts of our story forward to really acknowledge what's going on right now and how to encourage each other and our audience to like keep the conversation moving forward. And I think that's what's happening. That's what's happened in the history of America is, you know, there's been a lot of different there's been a lot of violence in the Black community and specifically around police brutality. And instead of like, oh, it's happening again, but looking at like, how has each moment in history furthered the conversation and how can we, and really thinking about how it affects all of us and how we all need to play a role at this time. So we'll get more into that, but I just wanted to bring it back to like what this project is about and why we are doing this show and the power of story and how important it is to be participating in conversation right now.
Yeah. And something that I'll just add to that is like, even like the movement, the organization, the term like Black Lives Matter, like doesn't really, to me, it doesn't encapsulate everything because it's so easy to be like, oh, well, I'm not Black. So like, that's a Black community issue. But like, to me, it's really just about us as humans, like in the system of like what we call society, like in America and, you know, beyond. But how like, it's a system. So we each play a role. We each have like, you know, a hat that we wear or just whatever you want to call it. And I think for so long, it's easy to say like, oh, well, that's not happening to me or I can't relate to that. So like, I don't have anything to say about it. And I actually think that's part of the problem is that like, it's a human, like it's a humanity conversations. It's a humanity issue. It's not just like one group of people or one location. Because even like, okay, we're in California. It's like, they're like, oh, it's so like progressive and like open-minded. And it's just, that saying that doesn't really move things forward, you know? So I think that's kind of, you know, one thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately. And also like my hope for like us talking about, you know, our own experiences today. So just wanted to throw that on there. Cool. So yeah, I think, you know, one thing that I'm excited, like why, you know, not only did I create this project with Ashley, but also like we direct Skate Like a Girl in the Bay Area, the SFA chapter, is because, you know, like Ashley, when I met you, like your story is so unique, like everything that you shared with me, like getting to know you over the years. And it's not something that most people don't know. So I'm excited for just you to have the opportunity to share your story because it's inspiring, it's thought-provoking, and again, it's unique. It's just like everyone else that we have on the show. It's not, and no one's life is necessarily cookie cutter, but like I've never met anyone that has had the experiences that you've had and chose the path that you did and ended up like where we're at today, right? So I just am excited for you to share that with us today. And, you know, I guess specifically, you know, like, let's just jump into it. But like,
Yeah.
Can you share? I know the story, but like Sadie doesn't, and most people listening probably don't.
Totally.
But can you share with us sort of your personal experience in relationship to the world, but more specifically like race, you know, systemic racism, but also, you know, like police and incarceration and the system, right? Like,
yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, I first just want to say like I'm so grateful to even have like a platform to share the story on. And because it's heavily revolves around my dad, who's originally like from Australia. Like and he's already passed away. So I think there's something really powerful of like, I get excited to share the story. It's a very heavy story, and I'll forewarn people about that. But I get excited because I think there's something really beautiful when you get to talk about people that have passed away and keep their sort of the legacy of their life like continuing. So yeah, and I think a whole nother conversation, a whole nother episode is just like how we talk about death in this country, and like this culture and how we like absorb and digest death. But anyways, yeah, I'll jump into it. So growing up at a young age, my parents were divorced, like I think by like one. And my dad, like I said, came from Australia. He actually outran like some Sicilian mafia. So I'm Italian and I'm Sicilian. My mom's Italian. My dad is Australian, but his dad is from Sicily. And they outran Sicilian mafia, moved to Australia. And then from there, my dad didn't get along with his dad very well at all. There was some abuse there. So he left the country and then moved here. And he actually changed his name when he got here for two reasons. One, to like really spite his dad. And two, so that people couldn't associate him with his grandfather. So with his dad, excuse me. So my grandpa. So my dad actually has a maiden name, which is Masato, and my name is Masters. So I'm the only Masters I know, because my two older sisters have a different dad, and then my brother has a different dad as well. So there's something really powerful for me in my last name in the story of folks that have come before me. But inside of that, my dad was a carpenter and like low income, pretty poor. Like I never really wanted to ask him for things. And so like that often came from like my mom, who was a little bit more middle class. But yeah, he was like a blast. He was definitely somebody that I looked up to as just like an adult, like role model and like a mentor. And he was the first person that ever showed me as a kid that I could teach him something. I remember being like 6 and me teaching him something. And I was like, oh my God, I just taught my superhero something. And that blew my mind as a kid. And that has really informed me how I show up for young people and the importance of really showing up for young people, but also what that looks like. So he was always so rad and so beyond. Like coming from Australia, he always wore like short shorts. He had super long hair, full beard, ride a motorcycle. So he didn't look like traditional dads that I like saw other like kids have. And he would like drop me off on his motorcycle, and he was just like a character, and people always, whether it's his accent or whatever it was. So from a young age, I got to taught like that how I want to show up in the world can look a lot of different ways. And so that was really cool. So I got to experiment at an early age with like how I wanted to dress, because I always wanted to shop in like the boys section and stuff like that. But anyways, so I would see him one weekend and then my mom the other weekend. And that was in itself, if you ever come from a family of divorced parents, like it's really tricky no matter what, especially for the child to go back and forth. So my dad was also in a motorcycle club, and being somebody that worked in like carpentry and stuff like that, he had a really bad fall from a 12-story building. And he lived to tell about it. And he like broke almost every bone in his back. And in the early 90s, they had him like taking prescription medication, and it would just make him groggy, and he like couldn't get out of bed, and like he just wasn't being able to show up as the dad he wanted to. And I'm in like 5th grade at this time, so I'm not really like sure what exactly is going on and stuff like that. And we always had a pretty honest line of communication. But I know that he would teach me how to garden. We had like a chicken. I've had a snake. I've had 2 ducks. Like I had all these wild pets. Like again, like just like a blast of a childhood when it came to him and living at his house. And so when he had that fall, he didn't want to take those prescription medication anymore because of how it would make him feel. So he found a doctor, like I said, in the early 90s that would prescribe him medicinal marijuana. And at the time, the doctor was doing it illegally, and we didn't know. And so I remember watering our cherry tomatoes, and then I remember watering this other plant that was kind of sticky, and it happened to be a marijuana plant, but it was like just a garden that we had, right? It wasn't like he romanticized it or like made a big deal, like, and he would smoke that. Like as a kid, I remember him like rolling it up on like a magazine, and like him making salsa, and like him going outside and smoking it and not noticing a difference, or it just became normal in our house. And he was able to like show up to my soccer games or stuff like that, and just like play basketball with me outside. But other than that, like his back was like, he would have a hard time getting out of bed even with that. So from a young age, he always had a really like gnarly issue with his back and his like ability to be able-bodied. And yeah, I remember one day going to school in 5th grade, and actually the night before, I remember like hearing a rustling in our yard. And I was a kid that was like actually really, I'd have a lot of nightmares about people breaking into our house, or like ideas of like being kidnapped. Like, and I remember having to go to therapy as a kid, and like drawing. Yeah. Just I was a really hyper aware kid and having to like lock doors, things like that. And so I remember getting really scared when I like heard something, and I remember being like, I'm at my dad's and I'm okay. Like he'll protect me. Like I feel safe there. So I just went back to sleep, and it was, morning came and he took me on his motorcycle to school, and I got dropped off. And I remember it was lunch. It was like right before lunch. And at my school, they called our classroom and they were like, send Ashley to the office. And I was like, what? Me? Why? And it was actually, there's 2 reasons. Either like you're getting hot food, like McDonald's or something, that all like the like extra like cool kids that like had all the things, and like parents not doing anything that can bring you lunch, or you're in major trouble. And I was like, well, both my parents, there's no way they're bringing me hot food. Like I must be in trouble, like crap. So I go down there and I'm like nervous and like kind of shaking, because like I was not a trouble like kid in the classroom. And they're like, the nurse was like, your dad's on the phone. And I was like, what? Okay, that's weird. And so I pick up the phone. My dad is bawling, and he's just apologizing, saying, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And he told me that he was being arrested. And it happened to be because there was a plant of marijuana in our backyard. And he always had a house that he allowed all the neighborhood kids to come in, eat snacks and get water or soda, and like just really like wanted it to place to be and feel welcome. And there was a kid on our block that was like the bully. He like hit kids in the head with a bat before, and he was the son of the local sheriff. And so what I found out later is that the sheriff had actually been poking around his backyard because he was abusing his son, physically abusing his son. And I think because that kid had confided in my dad a lot and showed up to our house, and my dad was really, he used to like be a big brother for the Boys and Girls Club and like a mentor for young people. And so that was just like a part of him. He really wanted to show up for people, especially young people. So we found out that the sheriff had sent somebody to snoop around in our backyard, and that's what I had heard that one night when I was scared. And so they busted him so my dad wouldn't out what he had been doing to his son. And on top of that, my dad was selling some of that marijuana in his motorcycle club as another way to get money, because like carpentry and his back, those don't mix. Like having a back injury and trying to do like carpentry or construction work don't work. So he was forced to do stuff like that in more informal economies. So that was the last day I saw him in 5th grade. Word got out in my school. There was a kid that lived in my neighborhood nearby, and he told everyone, and I felt tremendous shame. And I ended up like one day seeing him walking by himself in the hall, and I like pushed him up against the wall and like just told him to keep, my family out of his mouth and all that, because I was just so ashamed. And I didn't know anything about what like systems in place to like have me internalize things like that. And so I just felt tremendous shame and didn't want to talk about it. And like to be violent to another kid at school. And so, that was the last day I saw him. So he went to a detention center because they made it a case about deportation because he was from Australia. So he was in a bunch of the detention centers in Southern California, and they moved him around a lot. And that's actually like a huge part of incarceration, is they constantly move family members around. So it's hard for families to go and see their folks. And so like isolating people from their community adds more harm to the situation. And definitely exacerbates the issue. So he actually got moved up. Oh, go ahead.
Did you get to talk to him on the phone or anything, or was it just like communication was off?
That's a great question. So I used to talk to him on the phone like almost every day for a long time, for a really long time. And then when I got into middle school, it started to like become kind of like twice a week, and then it became kind of once a week. And I remember I'm so glad that you asked that, Sadie, because I remember being like, one day, because we have a really honest line of communication. Like it was such a beautiful thing that we had. And so especially him being locked up and me talking to him about jail and asking him how it is in there as like a 5th and 6th grader and 7th grader. And I remember in 8th grade finally asking him like, it really bothers me that you don't call me more often. And he was like, and he used to call me Ashley Marie because my middle name is Marie, and all my family in Australia, they all call me Ashley Marie. So he'd be like, Ashley Marie, like I don't call you as often anymore because, you know, I will always be truthful with you. And some days in here are really hard, and I don't want to have to tell you what it's like in here. And I don't want you to have to worry about me. And I was like, oh, wow. And that just like pulled at my heart, as you can imagine. And so in 8th grade, I remember graduating, going into like high school, and realizing that I'm his only child, and I'm the only reason why he's sticking around and fighting his cases to like try to like fight this issue of deportation. And I just realized he is like deteriorating quicker and quicker in this cage. No family, nothing, and just me, like his source of like fight. And I was like, oh my God, like I just had an epiphany of like, he should just get deported. At least he'll be with family. At least he'll be not in a cage. He can like have like some freedom. He can move around the world again, especially having a back issue, incarcerated. Like that's a whole nother ballgame, talking about mental health and physical health. They often put those folks in the same cells. So if you have a mental health issue and a physical issue, they're putting those people in the same cells, which is not great. And so with that, I tell him like, hey, like you should just get deported. I'll eventually graduate high school. I'll come visit you. Like we had this whole plan. He was like trying to talk about like, you know, like fighting it and like coming into Mexico and trying to come see me. And I was like, that sounds like, yeah, he was like trying to do so much. And it was just, he had like tremendous love for me. And so he gets deported, and he's like creating like a whole life out there. And like I go through my 4 years of high school. And I remember I'm like, and while all this is going on, like Sadie, you asked if I was communicating with him. Actually, like my mom like hated how upset it would make me, because as you can imagine, like talking to your dad and seeing how he's doing, and this like superhero and like just a rad example of a man in this world. Like how upsetting, like to hear that situation that he's in. And so, I had to stop telling my mom about it. Cause one, she already had a lot of issues. Just there was abuse before I was born that she experienced. And there was a lot of like, she hated how much I loved him, because she never got the same love, I think, from him that I did as his child. There's that unconditional love. And so there was all this hatred that I had no idea what the source of it was. And so I just stopped talking to her about it. Because I didn't want to deal with it on top of all the things. So he gets deported, and like as I'm going through high school, like I'm trying to figure out like how do you buy a plane ticket, and like saving up. I have no idea what plane tickets cost. I have like no idea, right? And Australia is halfway across the globe. And so I remember getting to graduation day in high school and being like, all right, I'm gonna come visit. And I'm like, I ended up talking to my sister and my brother-in-law about it. And they're like, cool, like what kind of money do you have saved up? Like, have you bought a ticket? And I'm like, no. And they're like, so you're graduating, it's June, and you're going to visit him this summer. How are you going to make that happen? And I was like, oh no, you're right. And I had actually just gotten accepted to UC Santa Cruz, and being the first person in my family to go to college, like that was a big deal. And so I ended up talking to my dad and was like, look, I blew it. I didn't know how to save money. Like I didn't know like all the things it was going to take. So let's plan for December. So I was going to like go through summer, get ready to go off to my first year of college. And then like once we get a winter break, I'm going there, because Australia, it's summer, it's amazing. They go surfing for Christmas, all that. And my birthday is December, his is January. It was just going to be a huge celebration, right? And like reunite. So we were like, okay, cool. That's the plan. I started saving up, all that stuff. I go off to UC Santa Cruz, and if anyone is familiar with Santa Cruz, has ever gone to UC Santa Cruz, there's a thing called the first rain, and that's when it rains for the first official time of the year, and that happens in about October. So I go into my like first month of college, and it's like crazy, and I'm like, holy cow, like high school did not prepare me academically to be here at all. Socially, like I'm ready, let's do this, but like academically I was struggling, and so I was just like burying myself in it. I was excited to be there, still kind of struggling, figuring it out. So I was talking to my dad off and on through that first month, but really just trying to get a hold on like college. And so I remember it was the first week of October. It was October 3rd. And I get a phone call, and I had just been talking to my roommate, my freshman year roommate, about my dad. And she was like, oh, we should call him. Like, I want to hear his accent. Like the most common conversation having an Australian dad. So I was like, oh yeah, I should totally call him. And then the day kind of happened, and then it was starting to rain, and everyone's like, oh my God, first rain. Oh, and by the way, everyone runs naked through the entire campus. And that's why the first rain is a big deal. Not just like, oh, we love rain. And so we had a bunch of people like in our room, like getting prepared, like in towels, like waiting, because they start at one end of the campus, and it's a horseshoe shape, and they come running through all the different parts of campus, and then you just join the naked mass of people, and then you continue.
It's just like define Santa Cruz right there.
100%.
Get naked and run in the rain.
100%. People are like sliding on the hoods of cars on their butt cheeks. It's wild. It's so, I'm not gonna lie, it was like so weird. It was so uncomfortable, but I didn't end up participating. And the reason why is I get a phone call. I also don't know if I would have anyway. And then like, it felt weird to like, if I'm not gonna like participate, like I'm not just gonna like stare and watch naked people running. Like,
so
I'll
just like, watch you guys.
Like, I'm just like flaring up all across the board. Like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Okay. But we had a bunch of people in our room, like getting ready and getting all excited and like, oh my God, I hear they're coming, whatever. And my phone rings, my cell phone rings, and I see the area code and it's Australia. And I'm like, oh my God. And I just instantly had this feeling of like, I got pissed. Like I just overcame with like anger and like, what do you want? Like kind of feeling. And I have no idea why. But I do know why after the fact. But we live next to a stairwell. So I go in the stairwell because there's like a huge naked commotion in the room. I go into the stairwell. I answer the phone. And I'm like, hello. Like I'm all aggressive for no reason. And it's my dad's best friend, Jeff. And he goes, Ashley Marie, like, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but your dad passed away today in his sleep at 4 p.m. And my world, literally, like you see in movies, like slow motion crumble. And I just start going, don't tell me that. Don't fucking tell me, like yelling. And I'm like, there's no way. Like, how dare you call me and tell me something like just bam, like just out of reality now. I'm like, I hang up, I call my mom, and I just start telling her all these things that I've been holding back this whole time. Like, I could never talk to you about, and I just blame her and make her so wrong for the whole situation. And she's like, why did they call you and tell you they should have called me? I was like, why would they call you? You hated it, just like going. So he passed away in his sleep, and I'm in college in October. I'm like 5 weeks into the first time ever experiencing college, and I have to fly to Australia. I'm his only child, and I have to pack up his house, and I have to like pick out his outfit for like an open casket and all these things, which is just like, I haven't seen these people since I was 6. I haven't seen him since I was in 5th grade. And so I go for like 2 weeks over there. I bring my best friend with me, because I feel like she's the best fit for me to have a support when I go out there. And so, yeah, we go up there and we do that. And that was just wild. And one thing I will say, which is like it's super heavy, but I think it's important because this has really shown me the power of our minds. So my dad has been keeping a journal since like before I was born. Like I literally found the journal where it's like the day I'm born and he's writing in there, which is so cool. And so I'm packing stuff up. My uncle's there. By the way, my dad has 5 brothers and 1 sister. The 5 brothers, they couldn't look more alike. They're like the Australian Hanson brothers, but like Sicilian, which is like such a weird thing to say, but I'm going to go with it. They all look super alike. So it's like every time I look at one of them, I think I see my dad. And I'm actually named after one of my uncles. His name is Ashley. He's the youngest brother. And there, Ashley is more of a boy's name. Here, Ashley was more of a girl's name. So yeah, so especially seeing him, they just look identical. So it's just like trippy. And so anyways, I'm looking through these journals, and as I find this box of them and I'm starting to go through, my uncle stops me and he's like, hey, I want you to know that everything in this house is absolutely like open and belongs to you. And I want you to know that those journals, I looked through them earlier and they're not easy to like digest, but I'm not going to ever stop you from like, learning more and more about your dad and all that. And so I'm like, okay, great. And of course, now more than ever, I'm going to look through these journals. So I start looking and I look towards the day that I get to the day that he passed away. The day before, on October 2nd, in there, he's literally drawn a Grim Reaper and it says, come get me. And I will never forget that. And I talked to my uncle and I looked at him like, how the hell did I not know he was in this state? And he said he was just in so much pain, back pain, that like he was just like miserable. And he said on top of that, like his one and only love in his life, like couldn't be with him. And that's me. I had a whole room that he had like had my little like motorcycle jacket from when I was 6. And like, he made chaps for me to wear for real, not like Pride weekend in San Francisco chaps, but like legit chaps for a motorcycle. He had like a whole room set up for me to like go and live with him. He's just waiting for me to be there. So, yeah, it was to me, like I said, it's super heavy and it's super like, why do things like that happen? And it really spiraled me into just like looking so much deeper into life and maybe like purpose of life or why things like this happen, because it's like the only place your mind can go. And in those moments, I really see there's two places to go. It's either like self-destruct or like rise above and see in which ways this makes you stronger and stronger. And what is the lesson on the other side of this? And yeah, and I've really sat with that like so many nights, especially after that. But
it's crazy.
Go ahead.
While I was listening to your story, I was thinking about the fact that you did all of this at such a young age too, where a lot of kids don't know how to process that, and they do go into self-destruct mode because they don't know anything else. Like to have your dad go to prison when you're in 5th grade.
Oh yeah.
Or for you to make that decision in high school that he should be deported and kind of like let him go. Like that's so crazy to me.
Yeah, totally.
And I was going to ask you, like, what do you think was the thing that had you not go and self-destruct, but actually like rise above, but not just rise above, because like, I want to ask you about this next, but like you actually then like specifically took actions in your life to be part of like the change when it comes to like the career you chose and the different organizations you work with. And then even, you know, to like present day. But like, so what do you think it was? Like, I mean, I know you had skateboarding, so like, that, but
yeah, I would say first and foremost, and I think this is a common thing that I've had people like really close to them pass away, but thinking about like, what would that person want? Would they want me to go and self-destruct? And like, that's not who he raised me to be. And like, my mom didn't raise me to be that way. My older sisters are like some of the strongest women I ever saw, like in early years of my life. And my environment just told, like everything around me was like, no, like rise above this. Like you are worthy and you deserve it. And it's not easy. And like, yeah, self-destruct is like, it's almost not an option is what I saw. But again, I'd say my dad was like a huge source of it, and just thinking like all the work he put into parenting and how transparent he was about transparent about parenting, everything from like being grounded, or if I did something wrong, he's like, what would you do? What do you think I should do? Like it was just a beautiful example of parenting in my opinion. And just who he was in the world for people. And yeah, to self-destruct just seemed like it would just be a waste. And it was like a way to live his legacy on. And so on top of that,
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. And on top of that, to speak to like kind of how it like sort of created a trajectory for me in my future. Like I remember at a young age, like because I was being mostly raised by my mom during all this, because like my dad didn't have a lot of resources. So I was in a lot of like after care camps and like day camps and like after school things and stuff like that. So I always like was around kids that were like more latchkey kids, or kids that didn't always have a lot of time with their parents, or like didn't have their parents around as much as maybe like would have been nice or whatever it is. And so I remember seeing counselors that oversaw us, and you know, I would like cause trouble, like nothing serious, but like I remember them being like, because I grew up in those spaces. And so I remember some of them seeing me grow up, and they're like, you watch, you're going to be a counselor yourself. And I was like, no way. They're like, you're going to be like a teacher or something. I'm like, no way, absolutely not. This blows, like, blah, you know, like didn't want to be there kind of thing. But I really got from a young age, like how important it is for young people to have caring people, mentors, like older sibling type folks, and then like caring adults. And
like a community, not just like one person. So like,
I
don't know, what I am hearing and like just your experience is like like your dad was so effective as a parent and a mentor that he instilled everything that he wanted, you know, into you, and you, as a result, even though he was gone, you were able to like, it was so effective and like just in you, like who you were, that you were able to like move forward and like, you know, carry on his legacy, but also sort of embody him. Like, that's like what I'm hearing. Right.
Yeah.
And then that combined with like, even though like for many people, like your parents are the most important people in your life, but even though one of your parents, you know, passed away and wasn't existent in your life, that because you had a community of caring people, whether it was your sisters, you know, your mom, these different programs, like other, you know, maybe even like friends or other people that, you know, maybe you skated with, like, I don't know. Right. But like that not only allowed you to continue on, and not just survive, but like thrive, because that's now like the role
Yeah.
you're playing for like people in our community and young people especially. So like that to me is just like the power of like community, but also the power of like, you know, like authentic relationships. Cause like oftentimes I think kids and adults, kids and parents like don't have authentic relationships.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I don't know, I'm not a parent, but like I'm guessing that comes from like, yeah, like trying to be a good parent or trying to like, you know, put on this like facade that like you know what you're doing, when I think like most people
Yeah.
don't, you know, because like no, there's
Yeah.
no book, but just the fact that your dad was so transparent and like
Totally.
would share things with you that maybe other parents wouldn't share. I think that's like so valuable as a takeaway.
Yeah, totally. And he really helped me understand like my like gender and gender expression, because like I said, like he was this like gnarly looking motorcycle dude, but he'd wear like short shorts because in Australia that's what he grew up wearing. He also taught me to like cook a lot. It like so it really like mismatched sort of like my understanding.
Stereotypical
Exactly,
gender
like gender
roles, yeah.
roles, stuff like that. And he like, because I looked like such a boy growing up, and I'd get asked like, "Are you a boy or girl?" like all the time, and it became so triggering, or just like other abusive language, that he was always there, sort of like reminding me like that it doesn't matter like what you wear or what's even in your pants, but it's really about what's in your heart. And I just like always remember him saying stuff and just different things that were like empowering. We're talking about like riding a motorcycle, like he's like, you know, he never said like, "Oh, you can't ride on the back of one," but he was always like, "Yeah, and you'll be driving it, da da da," you know, to sort of reinforce like just the power that I could really have, and like I can really just do whatever I loved, kind of thing. But yeah, I think also my sort of interaction with the justice system, or the not so justice system is what it really is, right? Had me jump into really making a difference for young people and families that are affected by incarceration.
Yeah.
Because
Can
I
you
think
share just a little bit about like the different other jobs you've had? Obviously,
yeah,
you know, like
totally.
you're the director, one of the directors of Skate Like a Girl in the Bay, but like the path that led you, you know,
Yeah.
after like your dad passed, so you're in college, and then
Yeah.
just having this understanding, and then like choosing these next steps that literally like formed, you know, who you are today, and like the impact that you make, you know, for others now.
Yeah,
But
totally. And one thing I do want to say that I just remembered is like, I wasn't perfect when it came to like not self-destructing. I was in college. Like there's nights where I would drink my face off, and like, you know what I mean? Or there was definitely ways where like destructiveness came up. So I just want to put that in. It wasn't like I was like do 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 like perfect, like, you know what I mean? It really took some stumbling and some falling, and you know, and finding people that I could like really be like vulnerable with. But anyways, so some of the things that I did like through school, like I said, is I originally went to UC Santa Cruz, trying to study marine biology and education. There was always a bit about education, because as soon as I got to college, I really realized like there was so much information that we should be learning at a younger age, conversations that should be starting sooner, like race, for instance, all of us, just even the history of class, race, sex in this country. And I had to pay like this massive bill to go and learn about all that. So I just was fired up about education and our education system. So I ended up actually coming across a unique program that they have called Community Studies, and it has you do an internship during the course of your academic career, if you will. And I knew that in there they have you like create a focus, and that's where I really realized I wanted to do something with youth, because I just think there's so many conversations that need to start early. And for me, what I wanted to really like do is something that really connected me. There was a lot of people in that program that were white folks that were just trying to save communities that they had no connection to. And that program really problematized like that sort of mentality, sort of a white mentality going to save communities of
white
color.
savior.
Exactly. So
that's like the term.
Yeah, exactly. So really trying to figure out like, what is it that I have experience in, that I'm connected to, that I can offer my experience and really be a contribution to folks affected by similar systems or oppression. So I went down and I realized I really wanted to work with young people affected by incarceration. And that had me like all over the place. I did a lot of different youth empowerment in general. I've worked for like nonprofits that were working on media literacy for young people. So knowing how to think critically about media around you, and how we're digesting it and how we internalize it. And then I've also worked for an organization, cultural centers, that were doing like guerrilla theater, which has you really take issues that are important to you, but have you act out experiences from your life and then pausing and everybody kind of having an input on how could this go differently. So it's sort of a political education in there. Guerrilla theater has a long history in the labor movement, and like field workers specifically, like figuring out ways to combat a lack of labor rights or like injustice in labor, in the labor movement. So things like that. There was also a graffiti arts program, and then tons of folks, unfortunately, in East Oakland affected by incarceration. So different ways that mentorship looked in all those spaces. 2 other projects that I worked on, one was Critical Resistance, and then the Storytelling and Organizing Project. And those are like near and dear to my heart. Critical Resistance.
Those are based in Oakland?
Oakland, yeah. Okay. Yeah, and Critical Resistance is an organization that is really about abolishing the prison industrial complex. And what that means in short is that our prison system, our justice system is not just at all. It's actually working exactly how it's meant to, and it's a business. And that when people get incarcerated, when people get locked up, they actually lose their rights as citizens, and that is the only way that you can exploit people for their labor. So enslaving people that are incarcerated and using their labor for cheap labor. So then they get outsourced to private companies like AT&T and Victoria's Secret and Target, and they do a bunch of labor for them while locked up and get nothing for it, pretty much. Yeah. And so it's working exactly in that way where you want to have like an exploitable working class.
Side note, really quick, if you like, if this is like not like, if this is like foreign to you, definitely recommend watching the documentary 13th, by Ava DuVernay, which is on Netflix and it's on YouTube for free right now. It literally like lays it all out in a very, all the facts and history. But continue.
Yeah, really, no, it really breaks it down.
I do have a question for you, but I want
go for it.
Oh, my question is like, okay, so then given all that and also what's happening right now, like what is your ideal scenario or like ideal outcome for people, like society's relationship to not just like the police, but like the whole idea of like incarceration and also, this system of prisons and policing in prisons, like what does it look like? What would you wish that people, like, say someone has no experience with police or jail or, like the prison system in general, and they grew up just thinking, oh, like they're doing what they're supposed to do. Like that's the society we live in. There's like bad people and they need to be punished and whatever. Like, what would you say your message would be? Like, what's your wish for like American society to have in terms of like an understanding or viewpoint around how we relate to, like policing and the whole system of like, you're bad and you need to be punished. Like,
yeah, so there's a lot there. I mean, first and foremost, I think, and this is something like I had a conversation with my mom about, and folks that just don't have to think about their interaction with the police a lot, or don't have to fear for their lives when it comes to police, but just the mere fact of like, when I feel like it's probably pretty safe to say that anytime anyone is driving or walking or there's a cop nearby, like you have a body reaction of like, am I doing something wrong? Am I doing anything? And if not, like that's something to recognize, because I'd say the majority of America has that interaction, and probably beyond America. But so here's the thing is remembering like, and this is things that we talk about with our young people in spaces, and like kind of knowing our rights. Law is written in a way for people to not understand so that they can loophole us and actually be a bridge between folks in the street and folks locked up. And police are those middle people that have a say in who's getting locked up. So for some of the couple like key things there is knowing that this country, for every 10 prisons, we've built one university. So just looking at like our priority and like where we're spending our money, and like, are we prioritizing like health and opportunity for folks? And then also inside of that, thinking about the demographic of this country. And like, yes, we can say it's predominantly still white, and Latino is rising, right? Latino population. And then from there, like, we get more and more marginalized communities, lower percentages of it. And we want to talk about the majority of folks locked up are Black and brown people. And so why is that? Why are certain bodies being policed more than others? Right. And so when we talk about that and the media's role inside of all that as well, and how the history of redlining, which is redlining how neighborhoods are broken up by what communities, and how property tax gets given to certain schools, is all there's layers to it. Right. So going back to the specific question of like, what would it look like if I could have a perfect world, or what my opinion is? I think the first and foremost, when we think about justice, so if people commit a crime, when we take them out of their community and we place them in a cage, how is that healing anybody or addressing the issue at hand, right? First and foremost. Now, on top of that, thinking about, now when people hear that, a lot of reaction is like, so do we just let out all the rapists and murderers? No. What we need to think about is, what does care look like for our folks in our communities? And to me, what that looks like is actually keeping folks in their communities. Now, talking about murders and rapists is separate, because that's often like connected to mental health, and most people know trauma goes and causes more trauma. So if we actually put in money into healing people properly and really showing up for our community members, then that would prevent a lot of that. And on top of that, folks that are incarcerated, about 85% of them have done non-violent offenses.
Yeah.
And about 85% of them are drug related. And that can get into talking about the drug on wars, or the war on drugs, excuse me, and talking about, how it's no coincidence that there's informal economies like selling drugs, like my dad had to do, but then also harder things that really mess with people's mental health. And even the mere fact of, like, you look at cocaine and you look at crack and the sort of penalties for one or the other. And because crack, so it's like a race and class issue here, right? And so we talk about how crack, you can actually get in a lot more trouble a lot more easily for the same amount of cocaine.
Yeah.
Who are the majority users of cocaine? White community, white men.
And
Crack
how there was
is
like
Black
an
community.
intentional decision by the government, the leadership, like around that, because of race, and like how they literally had someone at some point had to make the decision of like, how are we going to punish crack users? How are we going to punish cocaine users?
Exactly.
And literally someone was like, well, they chose, right? And it wasn't accidental. So like, that's something to recognize. But well, also too, what I'm hearing and I heard recently is like, people focus so much on the symptoms and not the problem. So like people are like, oh my God, what about the murders and rapists and whatever? But it's like, that's not the focus should be on like, well, why are they murdering? Like, why are they raping? Right. And I just thought about, like, in your own story, like that kid who was the bully was getting, like abused by his dad. So that's like a perfect example of like, we know the patterns of like humans. And so what are we doing to like transform those patterns, especially at a young age? Because like when you're young, you can turn things around. You can rewire your brain, like to like take on a different habit, or like train yourself to maybe not react, but instead, like, I don't know, like move logically, right? Because your brain is literally being developed. And so like what I'm hearing is like, instead of focusing on, dealing with the symptoms when they show up, actually going to the source. And this actually reminds me of what we talked about with Jess Wu, and like, the idea of like Eastern medicine versus Western medicine, where you're tending to everything in the foundation versus like when something shows up, you're trying to fix it. And like, that's kind of what I think about when I'm thinking about like policing and like the way the system's been designed like in our society. So
totally.
It's really interesting too, because I was reading something about how sometimes in communities that like the government or the police have determined have more like at-risk youth, they police them more like at a younger age, and then they end up committing more crimes.
Well, on top, so Yeah, no, that's so good, Sadie. I have so many things like to share around that. I mean, we talk about having police in schools, and predominantly the like where you look at where there's police in schools, it's predominantly schools of color with youth of color, right? And so when you start having things like metal detectors and police, your young people internalize that. You start treating them like criminals, they start internalizing, considering like, wow, I guess this is my only way of being, is to be a criminal, right?
Yeah.
And so on top of that, the way that things get handled in those schools, that pushes young people out to the streets, and then they stop showing up to school, and then guess who's patrolling streets? Police. And so with that, like something in East Oakland that happened a while ago, there was a curfew put on the black and brown community there, and then it was okaying the actual profiling of black and brown men walking down the street, because it was like they could profile as gang related if they're in groups of 2 or more. And then that's an easy way to like swoop people up and then get them in the system. And then statistics have shown is like once people are incarcerated once, recidivism, which is the rate at which they go back in, like totally sets you up to like, you're like, I don't want to throw a random number up there, but your likelihood of going back in there is way greater. And on top of that, we talk about like parole and the way that people like, it just puts you into the system that it's so much harder to get out the more and more you're interacting with it. So with that, the other thing I wanted to share about really quick is like, so there's police who police the neighborhoods, but what happens is the way that media plays roles and the way that we get taught that police play roles in our communities, people and members of society start policing each other. And we've seen a lot of that take place, and like people in communities learning to criminalize or fear Black people specifically. And then we've seen people's lives taken because of shit like that. So we need to also think about how we police each other, and policing each other can look a million different ways. But I think also the thing is to think about police and law is written in a way to protect very specific communities against very specific communities. So inside of that, really thinking about like, how do we reduce harm in our communities when there is an incident? And for me, I am an advocate of not relying on state agencies, not relying on police, not relying on child protective services. And I know that's that can be seen as more of a radical form, but inside of that, it's really important to understand that like when you bring police into communities and very specific communities of color, Black communities, they often exacerbate the issue. So it's really important to recognize that. And then the next question that usually comes is like, well, what do we do then? And something I highly recommend if it's something that you're committed to and figuring out ways that we can rely on each other for accountability and harm reduction is to check out the Storytelling and Organizing Project. And it was a project that I internship for a little bit when I first moved to Oakland. And they collect stories around people intervening in harm and violence without relying on state agencies like police or child protective services. Because then, for instance, like child protective services often causes potentially more harm on that child later down the road when they run into that adult again, or whoever was causing harm or the reason why. And then even child protective services putting those young people in foster care system. And that's a whole another conversation, but it's really cool because it had people just trying things out and having to really band together whether it's with their family or their friends and showing up for each other. So if they have somebody that's causing harm in their family, they all get together and they really figure out from like a place of love how to take care of this person and like separate and intervene like where the violence is happening and coming up with these ideas. So not all are successes and not all are failures, but it's important to see like and document like what people are trying to do to really take care of each other. So yeah.
Like, well, something that I think about is like, there's a saying like, whatever you resist persists. So like, if we're resisting like crime and we're like, oh my God, it needs to be safe. And like, like we have this already always listening of like, the world is unsafe and humans are bad. Then we're resisting like humans being good. And therefore like that's persisting. So same thing, Sadie, what you're saying is like, yeah, if you put more cops, there's going to be more crimes. Right.
Exactly.
And so like, I think there's that, right. And like, looking at not resisting like this idea that like communities can thrive and like you know like situations that are confronting or conflicting can actually be resolved peacefully if you come from a place of like listening and love, or if you have professionals that are trained to bring love and listening and not bring violence, literally, right? Like I've heard examples of like what does it look like to have like someone who's like a trained like conflict resolution, like maybe counseling, therapy, whatever it is, into situations of like domestic violence or something, right?
Yep.
Versus like someone who has a gun that's coming there and literally is like prepared to use violence in a situation that maybe already started from violence, which is why like the neighbors called the cops or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So like I definitely hear that. And then I also hear this idea of like, you know, we as humans, like we get created in other people's listening, right? And so what I mean by that is like young people, right? Like you're still trying to figure out who you are, like especially when you're in high school. Again, your brain is developing. Like you become what other people around you listen to you as.
Yeah.
So if you walk into school and there's, you know, a bunch of cops and, you know, metal detectors and you're being listened to as like a problem or a criminal waiting to mess up so we can like put you in juvenile hall, then that's like literally how you start to like listen to yourself, right?
Totally.
Whereas the opposite, where we've seen even in like teaching skateboarding, it's like when you listen to people as, you know, they can do it, or leaders, or never stepped on a skateboard, but like, you got this. Like that's a common term we say in skateboarding. It's like, dude, you got this. Even if you're like, I've never seen you do this. Like, I don't know, but I believe you can do it. Then that person gets to like show up as someone who can do it. So I think same thing with schools. It's like listening to youth as like powerful, like human beings who, sure, we're going to make mistakes as kids. Like we all made mistakes. That's like what it means to be like a child or a teenager, is to like learn from your mistakes, but not to get locked away and never have a chance to learn from your mistakes, because you're not able to learn anything if you're locked away. Like you can't, you're no longer like, you just, your chance to be a contributing citizen in your neighborhood is literally like taken away from you. So those are just like some things that I think about, like, as we talk about all this.
And
the other thing
about, like,
go ahead, Sadie.
I was just thinking about how much your dad kind of like let you talk and listen to you, and also like respected you enough to be transparent with you. And so now you're able to do that for other people.
Totally.
You know, and learning that as a youth is like so powerful. And then you guys get to kind of contribute that to people who are going through Skate Like Girl programs. And so like it's like contagious. Like the more youth we get to listen to, the more they want to listen to the generations that come after that. And then that's where we get more learning and more unpacking and more just education as a whole.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
There is one more thing I just wanted to share about like policing and sort of what it means to like demilitarize the police, and even Oakland specifically. Like all of them have been served in the military specifically, and like they call OPD Little Iraq because majority of police officers have served in Iraq, and so that they really make sure that they have these police officers that are like seeing the community as a war zone before like they go into it. And then I had kind of a cool thing that I was talking to my nephew at this protest that we went to last week, and what he said. And so I kind of just wanted to share that, because he was like, well, what if police police their own neighborhoods? And I was like, there we go, that's an option. But yeah, I don't know how important that is, but the demilitarize, I kind of wanted to share that a little bit. I don't know if how important that is.
I haven't heard that one actually though. So that's,
you haven't? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and that's why they make jokes of like some of the police, they like come out in crazy riot gear and like have all this, they literally have all these weapons that they use abroad in like quote unquote war zones, which is again a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
And like in like peaceful protest and things like that. So
because isn't the use of tear gas actually like a weapon of war or something?
Yeah,
that's
totally.
like, well, it's like two things. One, okay, what does that say about our country if the police are treating its own citizens the way that you might treat someone in a situation of war? And then also, what does that say about our country's relationship to other people in other countries? Like, to me, it just boils down to like, again, the listening of humanity. Like, are you in a place of like defense and needing to protect, and like it's everything's coming from like this mentality of scarcity, or are you able to like transform the default? Because fear is such a, we talk about this all the time, like fear, especially in skateboarding, like fear is such a automatic, like visceral feeling that we have no control over, oftentimes like used, right, to control people. And like humans have evolved enough to understand how to like control others, right? And it's like fear is always a thing that's used, like even with news, like you watch the news and it's like very clear, like especially if you have a background in media literacy or like produced content, like it's very easy to like invoke emotions in people. So yeah, I just think about how like, man, it's just like, fuck, like that. I wish, like my wish would be like, if people like, you could have your fear initially. Cause like, again, we're humans, like we're designed to need, like going back to like the breakdown of like how a human body, how a human mind works, like fear is necessary for survival. Like back in the day, if I see a dinosaur running at me, I should be scared and run.
Exactly.
Right. But I also think that nowadays, like we have evolved to use fear in a way that is totally different from, you know, like when humans were first like, you know, walking the earth or whatever.
Yep.
Like it's not about survival. Like we think we see someone and we should be scared of them because they're going to kill us. Yep. But like that's very different than like, oh, there's a fire coming, we should run. Like that's I'm scared, right? So like just this idea of like people being scared of each other, you know, it's like that got invented over time. And I don't think like babies like aren't scared of any, like you could give a baby to any stranger that's not their parents and they're not going to be scared, like or they'll be with their parents and they'll cry. So it's like I just think that's something that we learn, and like society teaches us to like, not teaches, but like things happen and sometimes people like get stuck in the fear, like they can't move past, you know, that emotion. So I think that's why also skateboarding is amazing, because you literally learn to like overcome your fear in a very like visceral, like physical way.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that point around like fear. What it has me think about is like fear of each other and like the concept of policing, and how actually we live in systems that actually have us maintain the systems interpersonally. And what I mean is like how we police one another, and then also how we internalize these systems. So I'm curious, like if like you all want to share any of your experience and either like how you've internalized oppression, specifically like the effects of white supremacy. What comes to mind when you all think about that?
Yeah, I think for me, this past month and everything that's been happening, you know, in the world has really been a valuable opportunity to like almost take a step back and look at the systems in place and the systems that like I live in and that we all live in, that I think oftentimes we're going through daily life and we're not really aware. You know, it's like zooming out and realizing and taking the time to listen and learn. And for me, I think what is showing up is, just this idea of like white supremacy and how that used to just mean like, oh, the KKK. That's like so far removed from like the world we live in, right? We're like in the Bay Area, we're in California, and I'm like, I don't know anyone or I've never seen someone that's a member of the KKK or whatever. But then just learning more about this idea of white supremacy and how it is a system, and how just the idea of racism, it's not like one person to one person. It's a structure in place that's meant to keep, you know, groups of people down. And just understanding my personal relationship to that, I think even like why I'm doing what I'm doing today, like the role that I play in, you know, the skateboarding community and the skateboarding industry or the action sports industry, realizing like looking back and understanding my relationship to, you know, both white folks and black folks. And specifically because I'm Asian American, I'm not black and I'm not white. So like, where do I fall in that system? Right. And I just remember growing up, like, where I went to elementary school, it was pretty diverse. And then we moved for like better schooling. Right. And in my high school, there really were not a lot of, you know, African-American students, and there were more in my elementary school. Right. So this idea of like, redlining in neighborhoods and things like that, and being able to own property, really played out, you know, and I wasn't aware necessarily. And I also think like this idea of other folks of color sort of like not erasing, but minimizing, you know, the experience of being Black, because it's like, oh, we're so diverse. We have like Chinese kids, we have Indian kids, you know, we have this, that, like non-whites. But yeah, just realizing, like, I think growing up, like, I definitely had this desire to, like, as every kid, I'm guessing, like, be accepted, be like cool, be like high up on the social hierarchy, because yeah, no one wants to get bullied, no one wants to get made fun of. And for me, that actually kind of materialized in now sort of like positioning myself in cultures that were like cooler and more accepted or higher on the social hierarchy. And looking back, that totally was like action sports culture for me, you know, like surfing, skateboarding, snowboarding, all these things. At the time, what I saw in media, it was like Blue Crush came out in high school, and like Roxy was blowing up, and all the magazines, it was like surfer girl, like long blonde hair, tan. Like, I remember literally like wishing that I was white and like dyeing my hair blonde, and I still have, you know, a little bit of blonde, wearing the brands to like be associated with the culture. And at the same time, like distancing myself from like my heritage or my roots or like my motherland. And there were a lot of immigrants in you know, growing up in Silicon Valley. And not wanting to be associated with like newer immigrants, right? Like, I'm first generation, like my parents were immigrants, but there were students at my school that were like actual immigrants, and just not wanting to be associated with that because it was uncool. Maybe like they didn't speak perfect English. And so, yeah, like literally like my relationship to the culture that we're in now stems from like me being part of this system of like white is cool and good. Also, like, that's what I saw on TV. That's what I saw in the magazines. Like, the representation was really different back then. We didn't have YouTube, right? We didn't have self-publishing tools. So everything that I saw was like white and blonde and cool in my eyes. And that's what I like aspired to be. And that's literally what led me to like going to school in San Diego and like getting an internship in the action sports industry, wanting to do things like surf and, you know, skate. And the cool thing now, though, is that looking back, like, I do see how skateboarding, out of all the different, you know, activities in action sports culture, is truly like the tool for building the world that we want to see because of its access. Like, snowboarding and surfing has a lot of barriers to entry and access that are socioeconomical. And so with skateboarding, it's like, I think I ultimately like stayed and went farther within skateboarding because I knew, like, over time I started seeing more and more people like me, and not just that, but like different people. Whereas in snowboarding and surfing and some of these other action sports, even like motocross or wakeboarding or whatever, it's still pretty, you know, homogenous in terms of identity. So I think I just naturally felt, you know, this like being at home in skateboarding, even though I'm like a better snowboarder than I am a skateboarder. I think I ultimately, like, just the community was more important, and having people that looks like me, or me not being the only one, right? That was like such a common thing in the action sports industry when I worked, you know, and lived in San Diego and Orange County. It was just like oftentimes being not just like the only woman, but then the only Asian person, you know, at the table or whatever. So yeah, it's just super interesting. I think understanding my role in the system, and I think that's something that I'm looking at, you know, given all that's happening. And I think if we all can like take a step back and understand our role in the system, I think there's a lot of value to that, you know. And then letting go of like whatever shame and guilt, because then I had this like realization of like, oh my God, like I was like judging and discriminating against my own, you know, people from my own motherland country. And it all came from this idea of wanting to be accepted and wanting to not be less than, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think understanding that was really powerful. I didn't get that until I was older. And then when skateboarding and snowboarding started really having like more of a global community, at least people were connected more. I know that they've always existed in different regions, but because of the internet, the connection, like I remember going out to Japan and Taiwan for the first time and meeting like girls who skated out there, and like my mind was blown. I was like, oh my God. And even now with like Aori and some of the skaters, I'm just like, oh my God, like if you were on TV when I was a kid, that would have changed my perception of myself completely. And I think even X Games had a recent podium where it was like first, second, and third was like all Asian girls. I don't know. I don't know if it was Japan or China, but I was just like, oh my God, like everyone on the podium is of like, you know, Asian ethnicity. And I was like, that was not the case when I was growing up. So anyways, yeah, I don't know if Sadie, you have any similar experiences or not.
Yes, I definitely do. It's kind of funny while I was listening to you, I was thinking about because I didn't grow up in action sports, but I did grow up in like a predominantly white community, and then I moved to Oregon, which is also a predominantly white community, and I joined the Action Sports Club, and I thought it was like so cool, but there was only one other girl of color, and then my friend showed me Mafia. And suddenly I had this like awesome, like badass woman of color who was like contributing to the exact industry I wanted so hard to be a part of, that when I was in a position to be able to chat with you, I like showed up alone to this panel just so I could talk with you, because I was like, whoa. And then through that, I feel like, you know, like watching you kind of lead in this community and feeling empowered to provide that or be that for a future generation, I think has really pushed me in finding like my own voice too, which I think is really cool. But I definitely, like in the last month, I've had to grip with a lot of shame and a lot of guilt for being passive or for being, you know, ashamed of my heritage or my culture, and kind of like trying to take that back and then find a way to contribute more and use the space that I have.
Yeah.
But
I can relate to that totally. There's like this weird experience of like, because we're not white and we're not black, we're not the oppressor or the oppressed, but then it's like some people choose to be silent. Many people choose to be silent because you're like, oh, it's like, where do I fit in there?
yeah.
And that is also part of the problem, right? Like the silence or the like, ooh, I don't know, you know? And I think that's the opportunity right now that we're all in, regardless of who you are, is to like speak up. And you don't have to have like some massive platform, you know, like you speaking up can look like talking to your aunt or your friend or your coworker or whatever it is, or your friends, and just sharing experiences. Because I think the opportunity to understand each other's experiences and connecting regardless of your race or gender is really what will bring like more together and connection for the world, which is what's needed right now, you know, versus like disagreement, no communication, and like misunderstandings perpetuated.
Yeah.
So,
and it's interesting too, because like the small changes or the small things you do, you have no idea like their ripple effect. Like I had made a post on Instagram where I was like, hey, I have been quiet for too long, like I'm looking to find my voice. And one of my followers shared it with her friend, and she commented on it. I had no idea who this girl was. She was like, hey, I feel this exact same way about growing up as an Asian American. Like, I love this post. Like, thank you for writing this. And I was like, whoa. And so I think it's really cool, the opportunity to, you know, change in small ways, but have that ripple out.
yeah.
Which leads me to a question for both of you, though. So based like from both of your experiences with, you know, race, injustice, inequality, how do you think, because you guys are both co-directors of Skate Like a Girl, how do you think that's affected the way you want to lead or the community you want to foster and create for Skate Like a Girl?
You want to go first, Ash? Or you want me to go?
Totally.
Okay.
I'll go first. That's such a great question. I love that, Sadie. I mean, first and foremost, what pops in my head is community and belonging. And I think really creating a space that like authentically allows people to share something like skateboarding, which to me is self-expression because there are no rules. And because of its accessibility and because of its sort of it being just an expression, there's so much room to explore who you are and who you want to be. And inside of that, when you can come together with people and create a space that I'm pretty sure everybody wants, which is like no judgment, to be like authentically seen, heard, validated, feel like you belong to something bigger than you, like feel connection, is so powerful. And I think it's really important for especially our younger audience to get that at an early age, and not just rely on like their family structures, because family can look a lot of different ways and not everybody has your traditional family. So I think having that and creating that, and when you introduce people to a space like that, we get to see exactly what Kim just spoke to earlier, is you get to really see skaters show up as so many different possibilities, and like how either they present themselves to the world, who they are as people, and then like also like what people want to create. And I feel like skating has really allowed people to explore who they are, but also to like, if we don't see something that we want in this world, then we create it ourselves in sort of a DIY culture. I also think about like representation and doing it authentically, because I've worked in a lot of nonprofit spaces, and there's always the conversation of like, who is the demographic, who is the audience you're working with. And I've worked in a lot of youth spaces. I've worked with a lot of in a lot of spaces that are whose audience and our serving mission is for like urban youth, so like youth of color. And I've worked in some super problematic spaces. And I think it's part of the nonprofit like industrial complex, which is just how you problematize nonprofits and how all the sort of inner workings and how they function, but how we tokenize people of color in those spaces. And I just feel like Skate Like a Girl has become such an authentic place for us to do that. And we're looking, I think, with what's going on around George Floyd's death and Black Lives Matter right now in this very moment, like we're really getting to authentically recenter the conversation as a social justice organization, and admitting that we've been focusing a lot on gender, and we really want to. We are an organization that claims to be a social justice organization, so we really want to bring in the intersectionality of like class, of gender, of sexuality, as well as race. So this is a perfect time for us to do exactly what you kind of did, Sadie, where you really stepped up and you were like, I'm not exactly sure what to do, but like, I'm here to like find my voice inside of all this and how I'm positioned in this world with the identities that I have. And like, I see there's something to do, and I might not know exactly what to do. And I think Skate Like a Girl, like it was rooted in like the folks that founded Skate Like a Girl or started Skate Like a Girl, they didn't know exactly what it was going to look like or how to do it right. There was a missing, and they wanted to fill that gap. So I think we're at a point in time where we see that there's a missing in the work that we do, and we don't have a lot of Black representation in the work that we do, whether it's in our participants or in our leadership and our staff. And we're having an internal conversation and really approaching it in an authentic way and figuring out why that is. So yeah, I'm just like so grateful to be in an organization where we've created a culture of accountability, and we can call ourselves out, and we're committed to what we say we're committed to. So not like jumping on the forefront and posting just a black square because that's what everyone's doing, but like taking the time to really have some intention and really getting how connected the personal, the political, and like the professional, and really, really practicing what we preach. Yeah. I don't know if Kim, if you have something if you want to add to that.
I think for me, just like finding so I had worked in the skateboarding industry for, well, it'd been like almost a decade at that point. But finding Skate Like a Girl was like just so like amazing and miraculous, because looking back, I realized, so my first job out of college was in the skateboarding industry, and it was at a footwear company out of Cyrus Shoes. And, I was plugged into the system, like the system of like the action sports industry. Right. And so being young and like my first job kind of had me be like, oh, I don't know. I just like, I'm here to learn, you teach me. So like I inherited a lot of the ways and the way the culture was back then, and still is in a lot of ways, because I just was like, oh, well, you know better, you're older, you've been around, like whatever. And realizing that no one ever, like, I didn't get the chance to say like, well, this is, what I think, or this is what feels kind of weird. And to give them some credit, I did have a lot of opportunities to do like try new things and do things, but there wasn't ever like a discussion. I feel like I just inherited like the system. Right. So And what I mean specifically by that is just like the way women were marketed. This was like still focused on gender, right? So just the way women were marketed and how the people that were in leadership roles, and I'm talking about the industry as a whole, and the people making decisions and the people running, whether it was an event or a brand or whatever it was, weren't a match for who the participant or the customer was, was. So I guess in more straight terms, it was like men making decisions for like a women's brand or a women's event or a female athlete, what she should wear or what photo we should use of her in the catalog or in the ad. And I think with Skate Like a Girl, it's the opposite, where we center the participants, and a lot of our staff has come through as like being a participant, then a volunteer, then a staff member, then a lead staff member, then a director, then an executive director. Like that's literally like Kristen's path, our ED. And so that just is like radical in itself, because how often do you have, industries or cultures where the people leading are, the same as the participants? And I think that to me like defines Skate Like a Girl and like why I'm so happy to like be a part of this organization. And continuing to make sure that is in place, right? So asking the participant, what do you want to see? Like, what would you do? Versus like, following this like standard power hierarchy where it's like, well, we know best because we're older and like we've been doing this longer. And I'm proud to say that out of our we have 6 directors, like our team, Seattle, Portland, and the Bay. Like I'm the oldest director and I'm 35. So like being a youth-led organization for youth, like skateboarding is very youth-centric. And it's, I'm also stoked that like more adults are getting on board, but to know that like, just because I'm older than like our 23-year-old director, that doesn't mean that I know better. Like, I love that. And that's hard to swallow, I think, at times, sometimes for me, but I think for a lot of people in general. And I think when we look at the bigger picture conversation, I think that's where a lot of people feel resigned, like younger people or generations feel resigned about the generation that was before them, So yeah, I'm just proud that like we get to actually, it's like a true kind of like community generated thing. And the programs, we try as best as possible to really make it like a collective experience versus just like, we're here to make decisions. You just have to do what we say to do. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think as you're talking, it makes me think about, because my head's always in the programming side, like we even trickle that exact same culture into our programming and how we can also empower our participants, young and old, to like allow them to step into leadership spaces as well. And so what that might look like is some of our youth participants may lead our stretches, or we ask our participants to like create a new skate trick and like teach everyone how to do it, and I think there's something really powerful in that. And it's like a transfer of that same culture, not only internally amongst like our staff, but down into our participation. And then I think that transcending into their lives and how to like interact with other people is so radical and so awesome.
Yeah.
And I agree. I'm proud to be at an organization that does that, for sure, because I've worked in a lot that don't, and not to say that they're wrong or right, but it takes a lot to situate yourself as an organization and contribute to communities. And there's a lot of accountability and willing to be humble and willing to take critique. And like, we definitely have that as a huge part of our culture internally and externally. So
yeah. Because you guys talked about this a little bit, but like being able to work with youth so much, like, can you see do you have experiences where you've kind of like seen directly how it can affect, the next generation? Like, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Like the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I have 2 examples that come to mind. I don't know if you have any, Kim, that you want to share.
Go for it.
Okay.
Maybe they're the same examples.
Okay. The first one is at one of our QT camps, our queer and trans camps. And it was, what we do is we intentionally make that camp week like open to what we call all ages. So that's like 5 to, I don't know what we're saying now, 65.
5 to 70.
it's so cool. And we get so many folks, so many more like adults that come and volunteer. And I think what's powerful is for our young people to get to see older people that are navigating life and identify as queer and trans, and, you know, like, you can make it to an old age and be happy and like live a like vivacious, abundant life. And then it's really cool for our older folks to know that like young people now have spaces like this and they're growing. And I've had, it's just been so cool because like on one of the last days we had a panel where our adult participants / volunteers like just had a panel where the youth could ask anything they wanted. And it was mostly a conversation centered around like identity, gender expression. And it just like was so beautiful. And like the questions they asked and just the benefit between the young people and like the fun they were having. And just my young self was just like in awe because like that was nowhere. Like you couldn't just ask questions and get to like explore yourself through others. And it was just so magical. And who folks were on Monday, our participants, and who they left as on Friday, like identifying with new pronouns, like maybe even having nicknames that they like asked people to call them, and what they were wearing. It was just, and who they were being, like the confidence they exuded and who they were, night and day. And like, it's incredible. And it's moments like that that remind me like how important and how valuable the spaces we're creating are. And how we're really trying to create a curriculum and programs that have folks like transcend our programming, that don't need Skate Like a Girl. We're trying to end these jobs of ours. And then the other example I thought of that is just like a very specific example. It was awesome. It was in one of our all girls week camps, all girls like youth, 12 and under. And there was a participant that's been in our program for quite a while now. And is awesome. And same thing, kind of night and day change as I've seen them grow through our programs and who they are in our space. And it was Monday, which is the scariest day of a camp because it's all new. And camp like that, it's all about the relationships you build. And so it's all about like peer to peer and like who's here and are they going to accept me and do I belong? And I'm trying to skateboard. Like, am I going to survive this? Like, it's a lot on Monday, especially for young people. So, I remember as the director, I'm there overseeing and making sure like parents know what's going on, supporting any children and young people that are like having meltdowns because of all of that stuff I just mentioned, and just supporting that transition. And especially like 5 years old is a young age to like go into programming and leave your parents. And still sometimes like it can be scary for your parent to like leave out that door. And I remember seeing this participant that had been in our program for a long time, and they saw me talking to one of the girls who was brand new, first day, probably the younger ones of the group, and was totally fine. 1 minute, I turn around and she is bawling and so scared and like shaking and like so scared to be there. And I see mom looking at me like, oh, poor thing. Like, I don't know what to do. And I was like, do you mind if can I talk to you for a second? And she was like, yeah, like really upset. And was just talking to her and seeing where she was at. And then reminded her that like, if she wants to join us, like if she wants to skate, she can, like just letting her know that there's like participation looks all different ways in our programs, and like come join for our circle, and, you know, like, can I sit next to you, and introduced her. And then there was another participant I introduced her to. And then another one was the person that I was talking about that has been in our programming. And I'm trying not to use names because I want to be mindful of confidentiality. And so I introduced this young girl to two people that have been participants, and I'm like, they're awesome. And the second one I had introduced is the one that I was telling you about. And the girl calmed down a lot, and the mom was like, thank you, like worded it to me. And I was like, just let me know. And like when we start the circle, I'll come over and we'll join the circle together. And like it was helping, and she was calming down a bit and breathing. And then the participant I had introduced to her saw how upset this young girl was. And so I turn around a minute later and I see that participant consoling this new participant and like going up to her and was like, hey, I remember my first day and it was really scary. And I want you to know, like, you are totally welcome to sit next to me and like, you're going to have so much fun. And like, I would love to be your friend here at camp. And like the girl's face went from like sobbing wet to like bright eye, clouds opened up, sunshine, couldn't believe that this person, this young person that like was peer to peer with her, invited her and welcomed her in that way. And that part, the coolest part is that participant had didn't know anyone was watching. And, I saw it and it just like, I literally like, I was like
Your
almost
heart
fighting
just, like,
tears. I was
melted on the
fighting
spot.
tears and I was like, get it together. And it was just incredible. And that person like was night and day for the rest of camp. And like they were friends and hung out. And I just went up to the mom later and was like, did you see what your daughter just did? And she was like, yeah. And she was like, she would have never done that. Like she would have never done that. She knew to do that from what you all showed
Like,
her in your
demonstrated.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I went up to that participant that like befriended her and I like let her know that I saw it. And I'm just so proud of her and that she should be proud of herself. And I just let her know what the impact was. And I hope that she understood how powerful she is and how powerful she showed up for that person. She just changed the course of that young person's life in our program. And that participant was like, like just instantly grabbed me and hugged me. But yeah, so that is a pretty concrete example of some of what our programming and the space that we just create and let our young people kind of lead and step into is just so powerful. Was that one of the folks you were going to share, Kim?
I actually was just thinking about our staff and how like some of our staff started out as participants and then volunteers, and just the difference from like when they showed up to an event not knowing anyone to be like, what is this? And then to now like the running camps, you know?
Yeah.
That is like perfect example of when you kind of instill confidence and leadership. And if leadership is part of like the structure, I think it's about like giving the power to people and letting them, you know, like make their own choices and decisions. And I think that's also like skateboarding, right? It's like you can't cheat, you can't have someone else skate for you, you know, you have to like figure it out on your own. But when you do, you end up really having that like inner confidence.
So what are kind of some of the takeaways that you guys would want people to take away from this conversation? Or what actions do you think people can take?
You want me to go first?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thinking about just what we've been talking about in this episode, I think the first and foremost is like honor your story, know that it's valid, your experience and what your life has been like and all the things that have like added up to who you are now and your story. Like it is valid, it is powerful, and it is like worthy. And then inside of that, like being open and seeing the same thing in everybody else's story and being open to that and like educating yourself on stories outside of your own and creating accountability networks or like groups, like whether it's like with your friends or your family, like folks that are, you've intentionally created space where you can talk through and organize and share information and story and knowledge, resource, whatever it is, I think to me has been the funnest source of education. In terms of me growing in my ideas and learning things outside of my experience. But I just want to say it like being intentional about it and making sure that like you're not tokenizing people and people's experiences and like asking them like to do the emotional work to explain it to you because that's a lot and that's like really loaded and it really pulls at people emotionally to have to like explain themselves every time or all the time. So really be intentional and ask for permission and create accountability systems. Maybe a book club, get creative, have some fun with it. And then I think on top of that, like, listening's in there. And what I mean by listening is like powerful listening. And to me, that means like getting yourself out of the way and fully putting yourself in the other person's experience and trying on what they're telling you and what they're sharing with you. And like really submerging yourself in what it's been like as best you can, right? Because we can't physically do that. But I say that because there's been so many times in my life where I'm like, I'm such a good listener. And like, I've worked in nonprofits and I'm like, I want to contribute to things larger than me, but I've had so much chatter in my head of like what they're telling me and I'm not actually thinking about and being present to what they're sharing me. I'm just like letting my wheels spin about all that and getting ready to say what I want to share next, or, thank them for what they're sharing, and like really be present with people and what they're sharing with you. And then the other thing in that is being okay with being checked, like being okay, putting your ego aside, practicing humility, and being okay that like the action that you take, it may be problematic, or the action that you may take, you might say something wrong, right? And being okay to like get checked and be willing. And I think remembering that hopefully that anyone that's checking you is coming from a place of love. And if they're not, like fine too, but remembering that like what is really the violent thing here is the silence. And so when people stop checking you is when you should be nervous and when you should be worried. So I think really being okay with not defending yourself and being like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Oh, wow. Yeah. I have some like things to research. Is what I see as some of the takeaways. But I think the main thing I really want people to walk away from is like just starting to do something now, like with all that stuff I just shared in the background, like doing something, and not letting yourself feel paralyzed or feeling like you have to know the right thing to say or the like right person to talk to. And I think just being willing and open and transparent and coming from a place of love. Yeah.
I just feel like I always like try to tie it back to skateboarding because that's like why we're here is like,
yep.
You're not a super expert skateboarder when you first start out, and you're going to get checked, like that rock, on the street that you didn't see, or that crack that you didn't see, that you literally get like body checked, right, when you're skateboarding. And so if you can get back up from that, right, and figure out what you did wrong and learn from that, like if you hit enough rocks in your life, you'll be more aware of like, what are some areas that generally have rocks, or let me try to look ahead and notice these rocks, right? Then that's where the growth comes from, and that's where the progression comes from. So I think like, for people that are in our community that have tried skateboarding or do skate, like it's all of this is the same, right? It's like, be willing to fail, be prepared to fail. And failure does look like someone giving you feedback that is correcting you, or, like pointing out that what you said hurt them or offended them or was problematic. And being okay and just being like, okay, I got it. Thank you for, sharing that with me. Not like getting defensive. And I mean, I've definitely been there where I've gotten feedback and initially I was defensive or whatever. And then maybe, over time as I got older, like realizing, okay, like I can either go back and say, hey, I apologize, I was defensive, or just starting to know like, okay, cool. Like this is where the growth comes from, like embracing those falls, embracing the failures, like you look at really, advanced skaters, they're falling all the time, they just learn to fall really well. And that's, I think, similar to like, conversations around, social justice or gender equity, gender equality. So I think there's that. And then I also think like, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Same thing. Like definitely can't learn a kickflip in 1 hour. It's going to take a lifetime of practice, and even to drop in or even, just to skate. Like if you haven't skated in a while and you get back on your board, it's going to feel a little rusty. So it's like, you got to put in the work consistently. And I think that's the opportunity right now when it comes to like racial justice is, definitely agreeing with Ash and this idea of like, don't just ask the closest easy, don't be like lazy and like pick the lowest hanging fruit, which I think sometimes looks like just asking the closest, nearest, easiest person towards you. If it's about race, then like, asking that person of color, or if it's about gender, asking like the only girl, and instead like just doing a little bit, putting a little bit more effort into doing the work, because we live in the era of like the internet. There's so much stuff online, like there's a zillion books, films, podcasts, web videos, like comedy, like Instagram, like there's people like actively creating narratives and sharing their experiences through every type, like dance, poetry, like novels, nonfiction, fiction, like podcast, like there's literally every form of expression of people doing that, right, for a living. So I would definitely recommend like just getting curious and searching and clicking and diving deep. You can learn a lot that way versus just like asking, someone when they didn't even want to be asked, or they're dealing with trauma, or they're dealing with whatever they're dealing with. And then the other piece too is just like, if someone is an expert in putting their information out there or their lifelong experiences out there, and they're wanting to do that publicly, then if they're doing that professionally, like pay them, like buy the book, rent the film, like pay the consultant, like pay the speaker for their experiences. And yeah, like just educate yourself. And again, that takes real time and energy. It's not just something someone can give you like a quick answer to. So I think just educating and like, sharing your own experiences too. Like we just created this podcast because we felt like we wanted to hear and mostly elevate our friends and our community. And of course our own, but like we have conversations all the time with people in our community. And I'm always like, wow, like maybe someone else could benefit from this conversation. Right. And nowadays the technology is there to be able to like put that out. So I think it kind of goes both ways, is to like educate and listen, but also like if you're in a space where you're not really seeing a lot of, real life examples of things that are inspiring or help you feel like you're moving the conversation forward, then, create it yourself. And then I also think just like the last piece is like one takeaway that I'm really, present to is like, we talk about putting the programs in the hands of the youth, right? So if we're, serving youth, we're going to ask the youth, what, do you want to lead today? What do you want to do? Like, you step up, like, here's the microphone. Right. And I think, in that same kind of vein, like when it comes to racial justice, like listening to Black leaders and experts who've spent, their lives researching and, doing the work and writing books and studying the history, like listening to them around what the solution is, right? And not just thinking like we have all the answers and we know what's going to work or not work. So, and I know it's not necessarily always uniform, but it's the first step is to listen to what are some of these leaders suggesting as a solution, right? Or what are they suggesting to do or to read or to watch? And I think that's where, the true transformation comes from. And same with skateboarding, because for a long time it was like, okay, there's not a lot of women participating, right? It was just like, before even just like diversity and gender identity, it was just like, okay, first we need to like step one, like 10 years ago, like there's no girls skating. Like how, like, do we like encourage more girls to skate? And I think ultimately it was successful because there was women, who were creating, the Skate Like a Girl, right? Or the events, or the Meow Skateboards, or the WSA, the Alliance, like Mafia TV, like all these different things, or the skaters themselves creating, their own ideas for events or trips or photos or films or just media, period, So as soon as it was in the hands of the people who were the identity, then that's when you started seeing the explosion and sort of the tipping point effect. So I think there's just a lot of value in like giving them the microphone or like the keys or whatever you want to call it, whatever metaphor. And that's where I think is a good start, All right, so we usually end the episode with acknowledging our guests, but today we actually want to acknowledge you, the listener, or if you're watching, the viewer, and just our community of friends, because most of the people who are listening and watching know us. And just letting you know that, I mean, a lot of the stuff that's going on right now in the world, what we're talking about, we're talking about people's lives, right? And people losing their lives and losing their family members and losing a lot, right? It's significant and it's urgent and it's heavy. And I acknowledge you, the listener or the viewer, our community, for being the type of people that are in this conversation, doing the work yourselves, right? And being part of like this world that we're creating, moving forward. I know at times it can seem really overwhelming and exhausting and daunting, and we all feel helpless at moments. And like, I know that that you're someone who is actually willing to continue pushing and continue growing and learning and educating and taking on daily life as like a marathon mentality versus a sprint, and putting in the work regularly, right? Because the show really is about, being the best version of you. And that's not a finite thing. That's not a one and done. That's like every day, every week, every year, discovering how to like level up or evolve or peel away the onion layer. And that's really like what we're about and what we hope, that we can provide in these conversations. And we just thank you for being that person who is willing to grow and listen, to us, but also to have the conversations yourself and just take a look at what does that look like for you in your daily life. So I just appreciate, you guys, Sadie and Ashley, and everyone listening for demonstrating, what it looks like to continue pushing and not just sitting back and giving up. Ash, do you have anything to add?
Yes, totally. Yeah, I want to acknowledge folks that have come before us to like give us the possibility to like have the positions, whether it's at Skate Like a Girl or it's like as far as like the right to vote and like to walk around the world in the ways that we do in this day and age. And I also want to create space for, like you said, like people are losing lives still over the color of their skin. And like, that's no joke. And we're all committed to furthering the conversation to bring a stop to that so that everybody has experiences equity and opportunity and prosperity in life. And with that, I also want to acknowledge our folks that are watching this right now that have gotten through this whole episode or have watched our prior episodes. It speaks to who you are, somebody that's drawn to something like this. And yeah, I acknowledge you for staying uncomfortable and committed to your growth and the growth of folks around you, and for any obstacles that you've had to overcome and deal with and navigate and maybe messed up and made mistakes and learned through those mistakes, and that are going to continue to be unstoppable with your own personal journey and leaving something behind for those that come after us. And through that, being a better and better version of yourself every day, not just getting cozy listening to a podcast. So thank you for who you all are, for us and for each other and your communities.
And I want to acknowledge the both of you for creating this podcast and creating this space, this digital space and this space within Skate Like a Girl, for fostering these kind of conversations and making people feel heard and listen, because everything you guys said, I feel like you guys embody. And so I hope as a listener, but also as a contributor, like I find a lot of value from you guys and from this podcast. So thank you too for doing that for the community.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
And I'll just end with a reminder that Ashley always says this, but like, you're the expert of your life. Like, we're not the expert of your life. Like, the whole point of having a conversation is so you get to like explore and discover what it looks like to, own your choices and be the person that you want to be. Which to me, that's kind of like what, I hear when you say be the expert of your own life. So don't forget that. And thank you again for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, y'all. If you are having any negative thoughts after listening to this episode, we recommend calling a friend, sending us a DM, or call 1-800-662-HELP.